And good afternoon and welcome to the Babbers Show. This is JK, your host today on Ujima Radio 98 FM. We've got lots and lots going on today, all about diversity and inclusion and community. So it's really quite good that we're following the new cafe thing here in the studio on Saturday, where they had 91 languages being celebrated, and I don't know whether they had all the food from all 91 cultures, but it would have been fun if they did have. Apparently that went earlier in the station. So today we're going to be talking about inclusion, and we have a group of people here over the 2 hours that are going to be talking about why it's fun to have a diverse community and why it's useful to have everybody included. I'll just introduce the first two, and then we're joined by a third person in about 10-15 minutes when they fight their way through the traffic. Bonnie and Sarah. Bonnie, would you like to say who you are and what you do?
Hi, yeah, I'm Bonnie. I'm one of the coordinators at the Terence Higgins Trust in Old Market in Bristol, and we work with people living with HIV.
That's amazing. That is a really, really worthwhile thing. And one of the things that I've discovered recently is that there is a kind of a separate part of your organisation now that actually looks after the people that are slightly older.
That's right, yes. We've got two new projects. One is a health navigator, and one is for somebody to work with people living with HIV 50 and over, because we're seeing an increase in new diagnosed, and also because of medication, people are living much longer, healthy lives.
Really important to talk about that. We'll come back to that in a moment. And we've got Sarah here as well. What's your history? Why are you here?
Well, I'm a permaculture teacher, and I work with Shift Bristol, and I'm also a member of the Bristol Permaculture Group. We do a lot of community gardening and food-related things around the city.
When you're doing community gardening, do you actually involve with the older people actually sharing their skills without necessarily their labouring strengths? You do get that a lot within the community gardening?
It's quite hard to keep them away, actually, yes.
Okay, so we're talking about both of you here are actually very much into either inclusion or how to get out and reach out to people. Bonnie, how do you actually get in contact with people that you want to?
We do a lot of work with the clinic, the HIV clinic in Bristol, and we make sure that we do a lot of media work. We do a lot of schools, training, universities, and we make sure that people know who we are, which is quite difficult. And we usually find that people don't know who we are until they need us. So although we're doing a lot of HIV prevention work, we're still not people still don't know who we are.
And that's even though you're to me, very well recognisable name.
Yes.
National media covers it, TV, radio, newspapers, magazines and everything, and yet you can still say that you're not that very well known.
Yes.
And Sarah, you're part of the Shift organisation, which even though I'm really interested in permaculture and always have been, I didn't come across until I did this course this summer. How do you reach out to people, get people involved?
Well, what we find on our courses is that the age range is very varied. I think our oldest student was 73 on a course where the youngest was 19. So we do get older students just through our ordinary advertising. A lot of the community gardening work, I mean, obviously I don't run all community gardens in Bristol. I'm part of a network with lots of people out there like Incredible Edible Bristol and Feed Bristol and all these different community organisations, and they find that they get a really high proportion of retirees coming to volunteer, and that they really get hold of it, and in some cases are the real lead volunteers and the ones that are really making the projects happen. So it's something that attracts a very wide range of people, and then there's a huge kind of intergenerational exchange that goes on in those circumstances.
Do you find there's an intergenerational thing in your side, Bonnie?
Youngest person that we've got is around 16, and the oldest person living with HIV is about 88. So very varied, and like I said before, this today is the start of National Testing Week. So we're doing a lot of extra HIV tests, which is just a finger prick test. So you can come along to THT and have a test done. And we've also have World AIDS Day which is next Tuesday, to remember people not just living in Bristol, but people around the world. So it's very important that we kind of get out there and make sure that people know that HIV is still here, because a lot of people think it only affects gay men or BME people, and it doesn't.
Yes, I was hearing when I was talking to one of your colleagues earlier in the year that there was this kind of hidden issue where there was a silent issue that was in the background. And as you say, it really has kind of dropped out of the media interest. So hopefully there will be a lot more going on this week. And do you find that the 16-year-old benefits from talking to the older generation? That you were saying, was it 88 years old?
Yes. I run a women's group. 64 women used that group last year, and the diversity within that group and the age range is very vast, from the 16-year-old right through to a lady in her 70s, and they all really get on well because it's peer support. They get a lot of support from other women, and they're able to talk about sex and other things that affect them, which a lot of people don't actually talk about their HIV status and choose not to, which is absolutely fine, and people shouldn't be pressured into doing so. As long as their sexual partner is aware or they're using safe sex, that's fine. But there are a lot of professionals that don't know about HIV as well, and they pressure people into telling, you've got to tell your mum and your dad or your brothers and sisters, which again is personal choice, and they need a lot of support around that before they disclose their status.
Yeah, I mean, in one of my other roles, which is working in water sports, I mean, it just doesn't even cross my mind, even though I know that certain groups do have issues with things like that, unless I'm doing first aid. And then I take the appropriate precautions. Probably rather the same in the gardens, isn't it? It's that you don't actually really mind who it is and what issues they might have, including everybody. And just because I know that there's another guest coming in a minute with this particular issue, do either of you have a problem, a challenge, actually communicating with those of us that have got learning difficulties?
Not at all. We have a few people that come in that have got lots of different issues, mental health. Discrimination and stigma is what prevents people to communicate their HIV status across to other people.
What about you, Sarah? You got anything about that?
A few years ago, I ran a community garden, and one of the best groups that we got in, the group that did the most work and that were the most kind of exciting group we worked with, was a group of adults with learning difficulties, and it was such a beautiful space for them to be. They had complete responsibility, and we'd sit around, have a cup of tea, have a chat, and I think the garden is such a kind of non-judgmental space. Anyone can come in and do whatever suits them, and yeah, so it was a really nice way to bring all those people together. We also had an Asian women's group. We had people who were on probation, you know, and all those people were able to kind of mix in around this very kind of open theme of gardening, really.
One thing I noticed when I was on the course, because part of it was based on one of the small terraces streets that runs off the side in St Werburgh's, is just how much of a community spirit there was within the street. Absolutely amazing. I did notice taking it to extremes at one point where they'd knocked down the fences in between the rear gardens to kind of combine the land. Absolutely everybody included within that street, which is one of the community things. It's a share of interests of like-minded people spread across a whole city or a community within a street. Do you find any issues with exclusion at all? I mean, BMEs were very briefly mentioned there within any of the communities that you work with in Bristol.
Not directly, no. I do notice as I go around that the gardening, the sustainability, the organic food tends to be quite a white thing in a lot of areas. I know Incredible Edible Bristol are doing some great work going out and going into communities and working with different people in the space where they live, and it'd be interesting to hear how they're getting on in terms of making it a slightly less white activity. But there is, you know, it's definitely a very open-minded and welcoming environment, and maybe I think there's work to be done in outreach and going out and talking to different communities and inviting them in, really.
Yeah, so if anybody's listening that's on the other side of the fence, as it were, do get in contact. It is one of those things about actually kind of it's life experience, isn't it? If I grew up on a farm, as I did, I'm used to getting my hands dirty, going out and looking at a vegetable, is it ready to eat, and things like that. If you're not, it's quite scary of all the information that's coming through. You don't have to have a PhD in horticulture to be able to grow a carrot, as I think of it. Have you got any comments on that side of it, Sarah?
It's a great leveller, isn't it? I mean, I just thought actually there are projects in Bristol where people are working with asylum seekers to do gardening, and that can be a really powerful piece of work in terms of a lot of these people have had a very traumatic time. They're living under huge amounts of stress. Not necessarily having enough money to eat healthily and things like that. So the idea of these projects is to bring people together and give them access to fresh air and a relaxing space. And there's some really interesting work going on around that.
We'll come back to that in a moment. I'll come back to the Babbers Show. This is JK hosting today with Bonnie and Sarah here in the studio that you've already heard. And Rosie has just joined us as well, who is just about to say who she is and what she's going to be talking about.
Right, JK, that's Josie, not Rosie.
Yeah,
well
I know.
Done.
I'm sorry about it.
I've been asked here to talk about growing community, my views on strengthening communities. So yeah, that's what I'm here for.
And just to give a bit of a background there, not only, as I was saying before, is that I've done the shift course with Sarah, but effectively with Josie down at one of the residences that she works with, is that we're going to be creating some form of community gardening within the residence, which has 12 people living there, and also within the community at one of the other places that she looks after, so that we get this food sharing idea going as well. Do you find anything with your people that you look after that they are excluded in any way for any reason?
Definitely. More so when I first arrived to the project. The residents within the house were quite isolated from within their community. It sort of stood out as a hostel at the end of the street, if you like. Over the last 18 months, I've worked really hard with the customers within the house to change that and to change our standing in the community. And over the last 18 months, we've had an open day within Hopetoun itself, where we invited in others from other organisations like Avon, AccuDetox, and I can't think right now. And we basically opened up the house. The customers made mince pies. We got the farm involved. They lent us a marquee. We had musicians down. We invited in all the neighbours to kind of meet the staff and say, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, please don't be afraid of us. Over the course of the year, we revamped the gardens. We've done lots of planting, made it look very pretty, so it kind of matches in with it. Well, actually, we had one of the best turnouts of flowers on the whole street, to be fair. And then St Werburgh's Community Festival. I mean, we're really lucky to have one of our hostels placed right slap bang in the middle of St Werburgh's, and it's a great community down there. We've got the cafe, we have the pub, which has festivals and events going on. We have the St Werburgh's Festival, we have the City Farm, we've got the allotments right next door. So as far as being able to reach into the community, it's there on our doorstep. It was just a matter of kind of putting in the footwork and creating those links in the first place. It's really exciting to know that we've got others coming on board to grow the gardening projects there, because we've already been noted for the flowers, and we've been noted for the positivity that the customers and others who are visiting into the projects are giving out. And the more that can continue to grow, the more that people will be within the household will be accepted as part of the community, because the house is already gaining standing within that community.
Really, really fantastic work. I mean, the more I speak to you over the last month or so, the more I get really enthusiastic about some of these projects. And one of the words you used there was fear. Bonnie, do you actually find that it's fear is the issue that some of the people that you work with have?
Definitely. A lot of people that are newly diagnosed very often come in a real state of shock, having just been tested, and have not expected it. Some have, but are still in shock. And because of the stigma around HIV, a lot of people think they're going to die very soon. Going back 15 years ago, before HIV medication, we were working with people that were dying, and that they, working around counselling and support, making funeral plans. Whereas now we're actually working with people that live very long, healthy lives. Just to give you an example now, we've had 15 births in Bristol in the last year. All of those babies have been HIV negative, which is incredible. Years ago, women wouldn't have been able to have planned pregnancies. As long as the woman knows that she's HIV positive, a lot can be done to help prevent that child becoming positive. So, we're doing a lot of work out there to try to educate people around looking after their own health. So people living with HIV, for example, we do the half marathon every year. I get a team running with me. Those will include volunteers, people living with HIV, people in their 50s, 60s. We're trying to teach them to live, that they can live long and healthy lives.
And I think this is kind of going back to your stigma thing there, is how do we include everybody in it? I do a huge amount of work with learning difficulties, autists and things like that, which is relatively easy to get them accepted by the public, because it's just perceived as that they're slower or they don't understand or something like that. But you can get people that get incredibly angry with them because they don't understand an instruction. Sarah, do you have that problem when you're actually getting into gardening, which is it's actually communication with people? Because it's equally true of a different language if you're talking to refugees that have only just arrived in the country, say. How do you do the communication side? Do you just demonstrate?
Yeah, gardening lends itself quite easily to this is how you do it. I've not done any work directly with newly arrived refugees, so I wouldn't know about that one. But I think it, quite often with something like gardening, it's a great medium to get people of all abilities, languages, and kind of backgrounds to get involved, because you can just demonstrate something, and people can take that at their own pace, and lots of people have their own different opinions. One of the most exciting things we did was when we had our regular volunteers and the Asian women's group, and we all stood round the herb bed, and each person was kind of pointing at different plants and explaining the medicinal or the culinary use in different cultures. So it's an amazing opportunity for exchange as well.
Yeah, I mean, that is where I get totally lost, because I remember things like going to the spice market in Trincomalee, or I was in the kind of West African markets and things like that. The smells and the sights are absolutely fantastic. I have no idea what I'm looking at when I walk up Gloucester Road and go into the spice shops. It's just absolutely amazing choice of stuff, and it's only when we get things like this diverse community kitchens and things like that we actually understand, where people are cooking for each other. Which means bringing the right ingredients, which means they've got to be grown and everything else. And I think you've got some ideas on this, Josie.
Yeah, definitely. Moving forward, it's again about the holistic approach. I want to bring allotments into all three of the projects, the complex needs projects in Bristol. It's really difficult sometimes to get the customers to engage and go out. There are some that will, but generally it's a lot easier if we bring it to them, so they can be involved in seed to plate. And I'm really hoping that as the year progresses and we start to have our own crop of food, that we can then, obviously start cooking it. It can be involved in our culinary workshops and in the kitchen, getting other people involved, looking at different recipes and different ideas, and going from seed to plate and bringing it all together.
Yeah, I mean, this is back to this food sharing thing. I remember it on growing up on farmland, is that we specialised in potatoes and beetroots, but we did need our own little kind of vegetable plot to be able to get our salads and tomatoes. And that was one of the things that kind of came up to me. Do you find at all that people in the HIV positive tend to be in isolated flats, or do they go into shared houses, or do they rent, or do they buy, or are they just ordinary people?
They're just ordinary people. A lot of our service users, what we call our clients, work full time. Some have their own homes, some live in council, some live in private. They're just ordinary people. There's around 1,100 people that live in and around Bristol, and we have seen 3/4 of those people, which is really good. and some choose not to come and get the support from us. They may live with HIV for a few years and then decide to come and get the support, and some just get on with it.
Yeah, a difficult one to work out, that one. You don't want to wear a label because then you will be stigmatized.
That's right, you don't.
You've got people that are in a wheelchair, they get kind of labelled as disabled. So there's a friend of mine that came out of a wheelchair recently onto crutches, and she was being shouted at for still being in the disabled parking space, even though she could only make a few paces. It's this stigmatisation that we get the issue with. And do you find that with the kind of the BMEs, that it's a stigma thing with the gardening, the community side, the sharing in the community side, Sarah?
I don't know about that. I think there is an element of people coming in, for, people not wanting to be stereotypes, and a lot of people have come from a very rural farming background and actually, are wanting to do something different when they get to this country. So that can be an issue, but not really, I wouldn't have thought. Okay,
we'll come back to that after the news. And so over to the short recording and the news.
Instead, and in the attitudes of people of my generation, I'm 65, and I'm now on what I call the golden oldie. You get a gold card and you get free passages on buses, and you can get all sorts of discounts, but we also get a pension. So I'm officially retired, and but in the mindset of my generation, it's kind of the start of a new life. It's a rite of passage. It's a stepping over a line into a tremendous amount of freedom. And if you've kept, like I have, active, physically fit, eat a good diet, don't drink alcohol or minimally, or smoke tobacco and all those kind of things that debilitate our health, then it's like, wow, now I have this time opened up that I don't have to scramble for an income, because it's just enough to keep things ticking over the pension, that I can even accelerate my service in the world. And I can, that's how come I'm here. Right now when I'm here, I'm getting the old age pension. So going back to your original question, what do elderly people do? Their time is more freed up from income generating. So what they do in our community more is spend time with the children, with delight. And it's not just their own grandchildren, but I'm at a grandparenting age now, and all my colleagues are grandparents. And so when we live rural, like in our community, there's 40 people, 30 adults and 10 children. We are all aunties and uncles and surrogate grandparents of those kids. So it's just a delight to spend time with the children. We kind of mentor the younger people in terms of their personal lives, their skills. We're held in a position of, I suppose you say, respect, tremendous respect in terms of our experience and our wisdom in community living and structures. And so most of us, not all, but there at least should be some of us on the trust board, which administers the land. And I think it's just a different status in life, even though physically nothing much changes apart from the pressure of income generation. And most people in New Zealand would become part of what's an organisation called Grey Power at 65, and Grey Power is quite a politically active organisation. It looks after the interests of the elderly first and foremost. They're getting a good deal, but it's also about the well-being of the whole society. So they join Grey Power, and then they might also attend U3A, University of the Third Age, which is like, now they have University of Third Age has guest speakers. It's also strong in Australia, and it also has its own program. So you can really get on top of sustainability learning by going to not a university within 4 walls full time, but they're sort of once a week or a fortnight, these day long or lectures, and towards the people join the walkers clubs.
Welcome back to the Babbers Show. This is JK here, hosting you today on Ujima Radio 98 FM. We've been talking about diversity and inclusion, and in my way of thinking, we were going to come across to something after in about an hour's time regarding this petition about the homeless, but it is worth thinking about that it is everybody that personally I think should be included, whether they're refugees or whether they're homeless or whoever. Judith, I believe you've got a little thing to say here. She's one of my co-presenters and she's been listening to the programme up until now. Speaking from your point of view as part of the Older People's Forum and things like that, how do you feel about including everybody?
Everybody should be included. We all get old, don't we? So as far as I'm concerned, Bristol Older People's Forum is indeed for everybody, no matter who you are. It's as simple as that, really. And indeed, if you want to come along to the next meeting, it's on, I'm rapidly looking at my paper here, it's on December the 3rd, and it's at the Broadmead Baptist Church Community Hall Centre. That's on the first floor, but there is a lift. It's dead easy to get to. And it's at 10:30, and we're going to be talking about end-of-life care for all. And also we're going to be talking about palliative medicine, and we're going to be talking about prevention of falls, which may not sound very cheery, but these are all things that our members have wanted to know about, and that's why we're doing it. So you'd be very, very welcome, whoever you are. If you're over the age of 55, and even if you're younger, I will let you in. If you're over the age of 55, come along to the Baptist Hall on December the 3rd, 10:30, and join in with us, because we want to see you there. And that employs to everybody from all the organisations we've heard from this morning. Please do come. And my name is Judith, and I will welcome you.
Thank you for that, Judith. It did remind me, Josie, that when Judith was talking there, is that one of the things that I've noticed down on water sports is that there is a noticeable number of people with learning difficulties that are much older than I would have expected when I was in my 20s, especially Down syndrome, things like that. They didn't have that long a lifespan sometimes. Do you find it at all in the support roles that you take on that there is an issue with these older people being a part of your guests, residents?
Difficult question. I mean, obviously we house people from 18 to 80. There is no age restriction on who we have. I don't know. People come to us for so many reasons. Some it's entrenched behaviour. They've been going around for a long time and not kind of found their exit yet. And for others, it might just be due to circumstances, life changes. I mean, you were saying earlier about inclusion and people being, what's the word you use? Not isolated. But I find that everyone's kind of tarred with the same brush when they come to us, whereas for some people they could have been trapped in the system for 6 years. For some people it might just have been 6 months. There's very few steps between being quite settled and then ending up homeless. Again, people can look at you with whatever eyes, but it would only take a divorce and your finances going south and then possibly another life event, and then there you are, you're left with nothing, the same as the people that you're looking at, and what are you going to turn to then? So yeah, I mean, I don't think it makes much difference whether somebody's young or old within our project. It's just a matter of kind of re-empowering them, helping them to find their strengths again, and re-energising them and getting them fixed back up and back into the community. That's, a huge part of that is what we do. So.
Yeah, some powerful words there with empowering and things like that, and getting people back into the community, because one of the things that I've noticed in one part of Bristol I lived in was how isolated everybody was within a block of 21 flats. Nobody knew each other, apart from a couple of people that had the same age toddlers. It was total lack of communication between anybody except a quiet nod on the stairs when you went past. And we're talking about kind of the community side of this. Sarah, if you've got very kind of individual people within a street, do you find, I mean, okay, the street I was using an example earlier was they're taking down the back fences, but do you get a lot of this kind of chatting across the fence, talking about your gardening and using it as a social activity as well as a physical one?
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that the main focus, I think, really of the Bristol Permaculture Group, which has about 1,400 members, is that social interaction. And I think, we're in an age where climate change, resource depletion, the sustainability thing is very serious, and it is something that we need to be really looking at. And the thing with inclusion is that it's not necessarily about finding things, finding ways of inviting people to come and have a nice time. But for me, inclusion is a lot about people feeling they've got a meaningful contribution to make. And I think when you look at sustainability, when you look at food, you look at reducing our carbon footprint and all those things, actually everybody can make a contribution to that. And what we find is that older people have an enormous contribution to make in terms of their experience of living in a less energy hungry system, of ideas like thrift and reusing and mending and all of that kind of thing actually comes hugely into the sustainability agenda. So there's a real need for that knowledge that's carried by the older generation. And similarly, people with any kind of disability are still able to do, they're able to plant seeds, people are able to cook food, and all of that I think really kicks into what we're really dealing with as a global community these days.
Yeah, that kind of, it's not just thrift in the kind of the really good, you have to go without everything, it's just being sensible. I tend to buy a lot of my clothes from charity shops before I look anywhere else, and I can see there's another comment coming in from Judith here about this, so just pass it across to her.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. People in my generation, 76 and upwards, grew up in a war, and for us it was perfectly natural that you recycled everything, you didn't waste anything, because we were fighting a war. And I think today we're still fighting a war. We're fighting a war to save the planet, and the more people recycle, the more people are sensible about what they use, the more people look at the energy they're using, the better for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. It's a bit late for my generation in a way. We were the ones perhaps who, having been brought up in austerity, went a bit mad in the 60s, and we went for everything, and we bought clothes, we bought cars, we had mortgages, but now we're coming back to where we were when we were children, which is to realise you can't go on wasting the resources that we have in the world in the way that we've been doing. We just can't go on doing it, and we've got to think of our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, all great-grandchildren of all races and all religions everywhere. We are one people, and it's time we started realising that. But thank you for saying about the knowledge and experience older people have, because that's right, we do. We've got a lot to give. And the meeting that we're having after the December meeting, which is in February, is actually about the Royal Horticultural Society. And I'll talk to you more in just a moment.
In this country have still got gardens that were left over from when they were younger. We have talked before.
Oh, good. I can talk about that. Yeah. So in this case in Dunedin, it's a strong university city, and the elderly people would register with our organisation. It was a community organisation, and so would the university students, and we'd meet with both and tee them up. So there'd be one elderly person's backyard to 2 or 3 students. And the elderly person usually had good quality tools in the garage, the soil was fertile. So those students would work the land, produce the vegetables, and what would happen, because this was actually a voluntary, this is an aid organisation for impoverished situations overseas, 1/3 of the vegetables would go back to the elderly person, 1/3 would go to the students, and 1/3 would be sold in a shop, and the money would go into helping people start with seeds and tools and stuff like that in places like Africa and Asia where they were really, didn't have anything. And so this was a service. So the other project was in Christchurch, and this was a skills training situation to Ujima 98 FM area. Again, it was 3 people, but that would also be used as a training ground, and we had lots actually of elderly people's places on our books, and then we would go out and teach new skills in that garden to people who are learning gardening skills. And it was more like under our umbrella that those gardens got maintained, and then there would be a little team that would go during the time in between. And so again, the elderly, it went 3 ways. That's very interesting. 1/3 to the elderly person, 1/3 to the people who are working on the garden, and 1/3 to what's called the Gold Coin Cafe, which is a Salvation Army. It's interesting. I operated in association with Te Whare Waimara. The Salvation Army had the night shelter, so that would go to the Gold Coin Cafe, which then would be used to once a week to feed people who couldn't afford to eat out at a restaurant but really loved that style, deserved to have that kind of style of eating for a gold coin, like a pound, you know, and they would eat a 3-course meal. And also food was donated from other organisations. And the chefs were people who were training at the Technical Institute as chefs. Yeah. So they got to practice their recipes, and it was just like a multiple win situation. So those kinds of models, the community needs to get in behind utilising those skills, the tools, and the already fertile, the land that's been built up over decades of the elderly people, to give them vegetables from their own garden.
Yeah. Hello again, this is JK welcoming you back to the Babbers Show on Ujima Radio 98 FM. We've been talking about inclusion and community and diversity and all sorts of different aspects about it. And we were talking in the break there with a hopefully future colleague of mine, Rhoda, who has her own experiences about things like remembering to darn your socks rather than buying new ones and things like that. So you've been listening to the show, Rhoda. Would you like to make any comments on that?
Yes, during World War II, clothes were rationed, and also all the fashions were terribly skimpy, which was later, at the end of the war, replaced by the new look, which overdid the amount of material. And so we did make do and mend, and wore very short sort of skirts and things like that. And it was all kind of austerity.
And you were mentioning things about the food side as well, and kind of the rationing on that, obviously, but growing your own things.
Well, actually, I was then in the civil service, which was mega boring, and I was evacuated to Llandudno as part of the war, and stayed on a farm with 2 friends, and so we did have sort of black market eggs.
Yes, I heard rumours, having grown up on a farm myself in Lincolnshire, I did hear rumours about that from grandparents and that and grannies and things about the odd egg going missing. I mean, in our case we had something, I mean, I always jokingly say 10,000 chickens, but nobody ever bothered counting them, there's just so many. And how many eggs, we nobody idea. We knew how much went out of the farm gate, but how many went down into our mouths and things like that, I don't know. And you've very widely travelled, we were saying earlier. You've lived in several different countries over your life. Do you find there's any difference between the attitude of different nationalities and things like that, between community and...
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was brought up in Shanghai, which had an international settlement and a French area, and roundabout were very poor Chinese areas where the Japanese mainly bombed. Yes, we were very British at that time, very up the empire, frightfully snooty, and I went to the Cathedral School for Girls, only for British. But I that wore off when I went to London University and became a socialist.
Yeah, I could see material for another programme coming up there. To go from the kind of the international
I
enclave.
married an Egyptian, by the way. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, growing up with the kind of the international enclave over in Shanghai, I mean, I've heard stories about it. It was very, very isolated, far more than I saw with the embassies in Africa and things like that. And do you find that, what was it like in Cairo? Because I only remember that it's absolutely an amazingly busy city.
Yes, there was a very snooty British contingent that belonged to the Gazira Club in Cairo, which I also belonged to. But my husband was Egyptian, and he was a professor of philosophy at Cairo University, trained in France. And there was a certain amount of prejudice still, but it wasn't so bad because every singular nationality considered itself superior. And I was brought up in Shanghai, where I was taught French by Russian, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a mix of different experiences. That is quite amazing. But just going back to your Egyptian comment, I did notice that when I moved into the city centre just over a year ago, that there was a proper vegetable and fruit store on the street just outside Debenham. So out of interest, I tried it. And in terms of local supply, without having to go as far as Gloucester Road, it is very, very good. run by, I believe they are Egyptians, but they are very, very resourceful people when they come across here. And I just wonder whether sometimes it's that very resourcefulness that works against them. Have you got any comments about that, Sarah, about the fact that it's this fact that they're whether it's coming from another continent like the Indian subcontinent and things like that, it's their very work ethic that creates a resistance?
Well, of course, the British were in Egypt for a long time, and in Sudan, and just pretty well everywhere. The French were in Lebanon. I've been to all those places and found sort of hangover sort of attitudes. And but my husband was a professor of philosophy in Cairo University. He was Egyptian, but he got his doctorate in Paris, so he was more French than anything. But Cairo was very mixed, and it was very chic to speak French and a bit low life to speak English.
Yeah.
I mean, can I just speak to that? I think it's really interesting when we think about sustainability and community, that actually, you know, sort of Rhoda's experience speaks of all that British Empire. We've been bringing stuff to this country, whether it's food or oil or resources, for a really, really long time, and actually our that resilience, that ability to be sustainable has kind of you know, disappeared somewhat, because we're used to just being able to pull it in from wherever, China, wherever. So I think this kind of, you know, in the war where people were much more self-sufficient in fruit and vegetables and eggs and all the rest of it, is something as climate change and things start to inform the way we transport goods around the world, then we can really draw on that experience that during the war we went from a massively importing country to a really productive country within a couple of years. And I think that all that experience and those stories are fantastic inspiration and knowledge for us to be able to see how we might be able to do that again from a sustainability point of view.
Josie, I can see you out of the corner of my eye ready to say something there. Did you want to say anything on that point?
Yeah, I was going to say, kind of reiterate the same thing, that we have moved away from self-sufficiency. We were quite a self-contained island. We were able to manage and maintain ourselves. We had enough resources here, but there's been a real shift away from that. You know, from people growing certain crops, we've kind of become so we crop more industrially, like giving over large areas for livestock or for certain crops that we can still make money on, and people moved away from planting the crops that they were before, planting the flowers that they were before. I mean, there's been a huge thing about bees becoming, you know, less and less, and bugs and insects, and it's like we've kind of chased everything away, and we need to do what we can now to kind of bring it back in and refertilize our soils and use areas that have been given over to nothing. We need to get back to where we were, definitely.
Yeah, that's very, very important points there. And I'm conscious that we're coming up towards the end of this first hour, where we're going to be changing who's actually speaking in the studio. And Bonnie, bearing that in mind, would you like to make any more further comments on both what we've just been talking about and the fact that we are in this testing week and coming up to World AIDS Day?
I've always got plenty to say about it. I brought some red ribbons to share with everyone to try to get rid of the stigma and to remember people living with HIV, not just here. There are 76 million people living with HIV in the world. We are putting on an event in m4a House, which is Telephone Avenue, on Saturday this week, from 1 o'clock until 6 o'clock. And people that are living with HIV will be talking. It's a celebration of lives and also a commiseration of the ones that we've loved and lost. And it's a very, very important event, and anybody is welcome to come and join in. So I'll leave some information about that.
That's wonderful. And also you were talking about the testing as well. That they can...
Yeah, testing is very kindly, we've been doing some testing today at Big Issue, and we're also doing testing from 5 o'clock this evening, which happens every week. Testing also for HIV on a Friday afternoon by appointments only. All you have to do is ring Bristol office to find out more. It's 011 79551 1000.
So if you do have any concerns about that, don't hesitate to call them. It is quite important, if you've got any thoughts about it at all, just to chat to them. Don't be worried about it. They're perfectly ordinary people. You shouldn't be scared. And sorry, would you like just to say that number again?
01179551000.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Josie. We're going to be going across to some music now and some change of people in the studio. So thank you very much for listening to the Babbers Show. Hello again, this is JK hosting you here on the Babbers Show on Ujima Radio 98 FM. After the changeover at the hour there, we've changed people in the studio, and we're going to be talking to Tony, and he is a mentor with the 1625 organisation. Would you just like to say who you are, what you do, maybe even mention your age?
Okay, if you insist. I'm 79, just, and quite fit, and I volunteer to do all sorts of things. I elicit stories from old people, particularly BME elders. I'm a trustee of Bristol Older People's Forum, and I've just become a mentor with 1625 people, young people, so I'm fairly busy in my old age.
It sounds like you've kind of done a career change as opposed to a retirement idea there. That sounds great fun. So when you say that you've become a mentor with 1625, what does that involve?
It involves a bit of training. I have to undergo training with other people who are becoming mentors, so I understand what the mentee needs and what the organisation needs and what I need as the in-between person. We also meet every now and again to not talk about our mentees, but to talk about how it is for us. So although we're completely confidential, we do talk about how we get on with it.
Okay, and what experiences do you share that to benefit your young mentees that you look after?
I don't know, whatever fits. I mean, that's the exciting thing about it. You go in blind.
Yeah. Okay. And what kind of young is it young men and women?
I guess it will probably be men for me and women for the women mentors.
Okay, and how old are these young men that you're talking to?
Between 16 and 25.
Hence the name of the organisation.
They're moving on from a difficult situation or a not satisfactory situation to get something more out of their lives.
Yes, I mean it is one of the things that interests me, because I did a recent posting blog about this, because I was thrown out of school at the age of 15 for being a disruptive influence and was a ship's navigating officer at the age of 25. I just did this a different way. School disagreed with me, or I disagreed with school, depending which way you look at it. We also have another gentleman in the studio here, Tom, that we're going to be talking to in a minute when he finds a microphone to be able to talk into. And we are talking about actually mentoring, using the life experiences that somebody has as a volunteer that's an elder of the community, and mentoring somebody who is younger. Now, is there any particular group, other than those that have been challenged by their lives up to the age that you work with? Is there any particular group you work with? Is it ethnic mixes, or is it particular disabilities or anything like that?
Well, just a brief one. I can beat you on getting kicked out of school. I left at 14. And I can remember all the people who helped me after that, so that's one reason why I'm a mentor now. Sorry, what was your question?
Is there any particular group that you tend to work with, or is it all groups, all ethnic mixes, all abilities?
In my other work, or
in general, as a person of your age?
I work with BME elders to befriend them and to encourage them to do things and to get their life stories from them, because they went through an incredible experience to get to this country in the 50s, 60s and 70s, and they had an incredible experience when they got here. That should be told.
I totally agree, because so little of it, unfortunately, is written down. It's all a history that's oral, and they don't tend to show it outside their own communities, I suppose. They talk to their children and their close families, but outsiders that might be able to get it spread.
Well, even their own children don't believe what they say. It's so strange, so alien.
Do you mean their experiences before they came to this country, or after, or both?
Mainly before, yes.
Mainly before. So this is back to something that I mentioned from time to time when I went to sea, which was about one of the better choices that you could take if you left school early in my age group, 60 odd, is that going to sea was an option. You could go there with no qualifications and work your way up to captain if you had the time, and it wasn't that different to going in with a degree. It was only about a year or so different. But you're talking about having the same young men trying to understand what I saw at the age of 16, which is actually Africa in the real. I was actually working down there, and I'm not talking about being in an air-conditioned hotel either. So it is massive difference for somebody that's in this country, being born and bred, and they're talking to their maybe grandfather about understanding what it's like in Jamaica before they came across, or in the Indian subcontinent, or whatever, things like that. Very, very interesting that you, as somebody presumably born in this country and brought up in this country?
In Manchester, yes.
Yeah, in Manchester. Okay. And we also have Tom here in the studio, who's kind of in the middle here. He's more of an organiser with 1625. So that I would guess the best thing to do is to ask him to explain quite what his role is in 1625.
Hi, yeah. So I am the coordinator of the Community Mentor program that we run, 1625. But I'm also managing the participation volunteering team, which kind of fits in with that, obviously, the volunteering. So my role is to try and recruit a whole range of volunteers who would like to become mentors, and we are looking for diversity. Obviously, people from BME background and age being one of them. So yeah, my role is to train them, make sure that they understand the program, what we're trying to achieve with our young people, and then supervise and manage each relationship by matching each volunteer with the right young person, really. So I've recently done that with Tony here.
Difficult thing to match up. It must be really difficult sometimes to kind of judge personalities and things like that. How many volunteers are you looking after at any one time, would you say, that are actually active as opposed to being on your books?
So at the moment we've got around 10 with a new group recently trained. We're aiming for 20. It's a reasonably new program, so it's a kind of slow process, with the recruitment and the matching. So yeah, I mean, hopefully by next year we'll have around 20 who we'll be managing. Yeah.
And are you still looking for the elders to come in and volunteer?
Absolutely, yeah. Tony is our eldest at the moment, so yeah, hopefully a great inspiration for others to come in. Yeah, really important to have those, that diversity and different options for the young people.
And yeah, excellent. Tony, you want to make a comment there?
Well, as a member of Bristol Older People's Forum, I would like to encourage a lot of our older people to think about mentoring and going into the training and see if it suits them, because it's the best thing I can do with my life, I think. Absolutely the best thing.
Definitely, because if you have a young person that has, for whatever reason, been challenged by the existing system and gets slightly outside of it, your experience as an older person can actually kind of guide them without telling them.
Yes. Hence,
presumably, the label for you, which is mentor, as opposed to the label of teacher, which tends to be negative in some people's
I've been there, I've done
it. Yeah. Okay. And Tom, where do the people come from that you're your mentees? Where do the young people come from? How do you find those?
So we support at any given time about 400 young people in the community. I mean, we are a homeless organisation, so we house and support young people, but we also offer additional services around that. And the mentoring is seen as a key intervention for certain young people who we identify. Young people with, some of the highest support needs. Young people who are quite isolated. Maybe young people who are just in this transition into their, independence. So it's about working with the support workers and trying to find out, which young people would be most suitable for a mentoring scheme. Young people who can commit, and often the most isolated, and care leavers as well. That's one kind of target area that we go for.
Yeah, I've come across a lot of that over my life, is that care leavers can have some real challenges adjusting to what now is the over 16 period. They're kind of left out there in the cold almost for some of them.
That's right.
You need a lot more support. And you say that we work with support workers and you're maybe looking after 400 children, but you've only got 10 volunteers. I can see why you're going for 20.
Yes.
So how much time are you looking for from somebody like Tony? What would be your preference as an organisation, 1625?
So what we ask for is a commitment of 12 months. So the mentoring programme is based on a one-to-one relationship. The guideline is meeting for 2 hours per week for up to a year. And there is a reason behind that. I mean, mentoring can occur for shorter term, but the 12 months is to ensure that relationships develop and to enable outcomes to be achieved. It would take that long. So, we're working with young people who wouldn't necessarily have had a positive figure in their lives. They might find it hard to trust a new person coming in. So it takes some time to build that trust, which means, we need that commitment for 12 months. Also, we do look for people who can show that commitment, so they're not leaving halfway through, which would be another, a young person being let down or, being neglected again. And so mentoring, it can be sensitive because, it can be, less beneficial, even more. It can be less beneficial for the young person if the mentor leaves halfway through. It's just reminding them of past experiences of being let down, that kind of thing.
We'll come back to that in a moment. We've just got coming up to a break in a minute, in a couple of minutes' time. One of the issues about that continuity comes all the way through, is that I work a lot with, I've got groups out this Thursday and Friday on the water. We're just like a half day for 6 weeks, 1 day, half day a week. It's that continuity that they trust me that I can stick them on a boat, and they trust me that I'm not going to try and actually throw them in the dock. And it's all the way through, and you're talking about a person's life here. You're talking about from the age of 16 onwards. It's really important to get that choice right. I was talking to an adult the other day that I worked with, taking them out into connecting with nature, as I call it. And he'd been on 4 separate courses in his kind of mid-20s to wait 4 separate sets of 6 months, because people were just saying, oh, go and do that, go and do this, go and do that. That was an extreme case. That was like 2 years out of his life, plus all the application times and everything else. It's really, really difficult to make that choice. Tony, you're just about to start on this kind of voyage with this particular young man that you're going to be working with, and we're just coming up to a break now, so we'll go across to that. Back to the Babbers Show. This is JK hosting today on the Ujima Radio 98 FM, and we're talking about mentoring as an elder of the community across to the 16 to 25 year age group, rather than the gardening skills we were talking about in the bar style. And Tony, you're one of the elders of the community here. Do you find there's any particular subject that works better for you because it's something that you've really experienced yourself, as opposed to talking about something you've learnt from a book?
That's a hard one. I suppose what came up in my mind was going caving or deep sea sailing, where you have to trust the skipper or the person in charge, and whatever happens, no matter how scared you get, you have to trust that person and to get you through. And that's a bit like mentoring, I think. But I hope we're not going to scare them like that. But also taking exams, starting something, making a decision. making a decision is the most difficult thing we take on, because often we don't actually make the decision. We sort of think we do, but then we realise afterwards we haven't, when we pick up that cigarette packet and have another cigarette.
That's what I call making a choice, having a cigarette, but making a decision when you're under pressure. It's quite interesting you're talking about deep sea sailing there. I mean, as skipper, I've done 4 transatlantics under sail, and in my whole 50 years of sailing, I've only ever put on a band-aid, and that probably means that there's going to be something more happening this week. But it's psychologically, you've got to care for your crew, because if they don't respect you, if you just make a quick decision and say, go and do this, go and do that, if they think about it, it'll go wrong. They need to instantly trust that what you've asked them to do is the right thing. Whereas when you're talking to one of your mentees about maybe choosing a course or something like that, what kind of support do you get from 1625 as an organisation? You've obviously done some training here. Is there lots of information about where you might be able to point somebody to get on a course, whether it's a 6 week simple course or whether it's a 6 month long more technical course? Presumably you've got lots of information back at head office.
If the mentee wants some training, then we can find the training. Tom will do that with his people. Yes.
So that's all back to you, Tom, is it? So what kind of training can you offer? I mean, there's the simple things that you would expect, like workplace training and maybe for a work placement or something like that. But in longer term things, are you be able to do academic courses, practical courses?
Yeah, I think it's good just to point out that where the young people are in terms of their personal development and academic achievement. That's probably quite a long way off for some of them. So we're really looking at that kind of foundation level first step into even having the self-confidence to even consider going on to an academic course. We do work in partnership with colleges within the city, and places like the Prince's Trust and that kind of thing, where Fairbridge, we will refer in, and we hope that would be an outcome for one of the young people. But Tony's, I mean, when you're asking that question, the word that came to mind was empowerment, and that's something we look at in the training. So if a young person wants to find out about a course, then Tony's there to encourage that young person to find out about that course, rather than maybe doing things for them and giving them a load of information.
It's what I, in my layman's terms, call tempting the person into inquiring about something as opposed to telling them how to do it. Absolutely, and what to do. It's one of those things that with the volunteers, if they actually make the effort to come to you, they're obviously interested in the first place. If you go and actually force them into it, it's quite a different thing. And Judith, would you like to make a comment here about connecting with the elders as to how they can become volunteers and things like that, from your general experience with getting people involved with the Bristol Older People's Forum?
Yes, I mean, I think that older people get a great deal out of being with younger people. I think we can learn so much from each other. Most of us have been... It's interesting that of the people in this room, all of us who are involved in community affairs, as it were, we've all been bad kids at school. And I certainly was one of those. I couldn't wait to get out, I've got to be honest. I went to 16 different schools because I was a service child. So I went on 3 different continents to 16 different schools. I could not wait to leave. But the only message I have for anybody at all is that if you do volunteer and if you do get involved in a young person and you see them grow and develop, that must be a wonderful thing for you, never mind for them. So it's not just that they're getting something out of it, you're getting something out of it too. That's what I think. And Bristol Older People's Forum, yes, we do want people to become involved. Nowadays, there's so many fancy phrases, isn't there? Intergenerational words. It's sort of flavour of the month, isn't it? And yes, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the more people understand each other, the better. When I grew up, every house in the street had a granny in the front room. They were 2 up, 2 down, and you had a granny in the front room, usually because granddads had very often died young, because they were manual labourers or whatever, or they'd been in the world wars. And so you grew up with an older person. They were there all the time. So there wasn't this gap between the generations like there is today. Families seem to stay together more, And because of that, maybe they were unhappy staying together, but they did stay together. And because of that, children grew up in an atmosphere where there was some sort of stability, even if it was sometimes a bit wobbly. Nowadays, my heart just aches for young people that I see.
Yeah, you were going back to the kind of the comment about family there, is that I was very, very, very lucky to grow up with one very, very active granny in the same house, and one grandma that was gradually getting, she eventually went blind with our glaucoma, so she was kind of already slowing down. But it was 4 generations in the house.
That's right, and because of that you had this more of an understanding, because you saw, you're all just people, weren't you? And that's the difficulty today. There's this fear been engendered, I'm not sure where it's come from, between the generations. People being afraid, ooh, they're wearing hoodies, and being afraid to walk down the street, and it's rubbish. My grandson wears a hoodie, and he's the nicest, kindest boy you could hope to meet, and most people are. In every single person you meet, there's goodness. It's just you need to reach to it, and if they've been rejected in the past, it's so much harder for people, I think, in my ignorance I'm saying this, perhaps so much harder to reach out to other people if you've constantly been rejected over and over again. And that's why I agree that if you're going to do this mentoring, you must commit to it, because you mustn't put another young person in the position of being rejected yet again because you've got too busy or you want to do something else.
That's very, very true. Now we're going to go across to another piece of music here, because I've just noticed somebody coming up that we also want in the studio. So we'll be back in a few moments. This is JK signing across to some music. To the Babbers Show, this is JK hosting here on Ujima Radio 98 FM. We've been talking about lots of subjects over the last hour and a half, and we were going to go across anyway onto this homeless thing. And my colleague Judith does have something to say about this, and so I'm just going to pass you straight across to her.
Yes, I was pleased to hear in the news that we've all just been listening to that the Mayor's going to consider it, but I'd be a lot more pleased if he was going to actually do something. Elisha Hindley Cooper, who is a student in the city, started a petition to plead to the council to open empty buildings, and goodness knows we've got enough in Bristol, to the homeless in winter. And nearly 7,000 people signed that petition, including me. Manchester has agreed to open a home for rough sleepers because it's going to be a bitter winter. There's a petition going on in Bury, there's one in North Somerset, there's one in Guildford, there's one in Harlow, there's one in Glasgow, in Bridport and Nottingham. So I do hope that the council will seriously consider what it must be like to be one of those people huddled in a doorway under some sheets of newspaper when the weather's like it is now. Many of these people may well be young, but there are older sleepers too, and I do think this is something that the City Council should think about. And I know what they're going to say. Somebody's going to say, oh well, if you let people into an empty building, they might cause a bit of damage, or get mud on the floor or whatever. But if it's a choice between having a building, a perfectly good building with running water and flushing loos, and a roof standing empty and people sleeping rough in the streets, well, the answer seems fairly obvious to me.
Thank you, Judith. And we're very lucky to be joined here by Sue, who comes from an organisation that she will explain in a moment. But many years ago she got involved with these issues about being homeless and how they can be helped and things like that. So Sue, how did you get involved, and what organisation are you involved with now?
Thank you, JK. I got involved when I was merrily teaching in a primary school. I heard, this was in 1991, I heard that 3 monks were coming to Bristol to work with, in those days the word was marginalised people in the city. And I heard their dream. Their dream was to set up an oasis of peace in the heart of the city. I heard their dream. I didn't know how I could help. As I say, I was working full-time at that period. And 3 months after the meeting, we set up a drop-in centre on a Sunday evening at a local church, St Nick's in Stapleton Road. Sunday evening because it was the only evening of the week when there was no provision for homeless people. And so we set up this drop-in centre and we welcomed homeless people. We made sandwiches and cups of tea for them, rented a television and in those days a DVD, and showed a funny DVD to them. And slowly but surely got used to, we were known in those days as the monks, punks and drunks. And slowly but surely we came to realise that every week the same people were coming back to us. And not only was the fact that they had something in common, that being homelessness, quite a number of soldiers, we had people who were homeless following the troubles in Northern Ireland. And so again, we still thought, well, a hostel for homeless men originally, a wet hostel. And then we got a lease on, we let it be known that we were looking for permanent accommodation, and we got a lease on the St James Priory building, which is Bristol's oldest building, not just Bristol's oldest church, Bristol's oldest building. We got a lease of 99 years on that. The monk said to me, "Hey, are you coming along with us?" And I panicked a bit, giving up a salary, but then I became ill, and the decision was made for me. So we went along to St James Priory. The church was in pretty bad condition because it had been redundant since 1984, and this was 1992. So we started fundraising, and we built a wall in the church to facilitate a hall, and continued with a drop-in centre there. So we got up to 300 homeless people every Sunday evening.
That's amazing.
Set up a band of volunteers and made thousands of sandwiches every Sunday. And then we came to realise that everyone who was coming to us, almost without exception, was not only homeless, but it was also addicted to drugs and or alcohol. And so we put our thinking caps on and thought, well, hey, hang on a minute. It's one thing giving people a bed for the night, which is brilliant, and that's not undermining, hostels. It's brilliant. It's definitely what is needed. But we thought, how can we maybe help people to give up drinking and using? We didn't have any idea of where to begin. And we moved to the church, and then one day a lady was leaving the church. We started talking to her, and it became clear that she was a doctor and she'd worked in a rehab, and call it coincidence. I don't think so. I think it was all meant to be. And so we got in touch with Broadway Lodge in Weston-super-Mare, asked them if they would and could train counsellors for us. They said, you give us the dosh and we'll train the counsellors. So started fundraising then to raise money to get counsellors trained, and then started thinking about opening a rehab for homeless addicts and alcoholics, not only male, but I put my 2 penneth in and said that it should be for females as well. And so fundraising started. The majority of people thought we were absolutely crazy. We didn't have a bean to start with. But as I said earlier, I truly believe it was meant to be, because within 18 months or so, we were building what we called Walsingham House, our primary rehab.
And that's the building that's next to the St James Priory that we all know now is built in 1129, and next to it has got the new Walsingham House, which is the same ethos as was the original building. And the monastery and everything else.
It was.
You say 300 people that you were serving on a Sunday evening, the homeless. And I do know there's a lot of wonderful places dotted around Bristol now that still do the soup kitchens and things like that.
Yeah.
Was there any particular age group that you noticed? I mean, we're talking about early 1990s here, so 25 years ago.
I would say on average it was people who were late 20s in those days,
Okay, and have you noticed any change recently? If you've been going past one of these open air ones where you can actually see what's going on, it's slightly more difficult to tell age groups when you.
Part of it is guessing, I suppose, but I think it's a little younger. Overall.
And Tom, and Tom, you're in this kind of the younger age group, under 25s. Have you noticed an increase in the younger generation coming through into this homeless situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's reported, isn't it, that there's recently, the stats say there's an increase in homeless generally. We still have a steady flow of people who need our services. But yeah, I mean, in the context of, a lot of the young people we work with, they have difficulties with, surviving on benefits, and access to food and stuff is an issue, and I mean, we do our bit to do that, but I know we do give vouchers to our young people so they can go and access food banks and that kind of thing, which relates to that. So.
And Judith, have you come across anybody that's coming in from the older end? I do know that the over 60s prison population is one of the fastest rising, and it's the same in the alcoholic sector, as the over 60s is rapidly rising compared to the rest of the general population. Is there anything that you've noticed at all?
I can't say that I've got personal knowledge of this, but I do know, I've seen statistics, and they certainly bear out what you're saying. And I think that this is something that we have to take on board as a society, that we must offer something to people who are homeless. And I was very interested to hear about how your organisation, sorry about this, I'm losing my voice, folks, it's what happens when you get old sometimes. I was very interested to hear what you were saying about your organisation. And of course there are the Cyrenians as well, who do a wonderful, wonderful job, and they've been in Bristol going for quite a long time now in Old Market. So I don't know what the answer is, other than to say that nobody of whatever age ought to have to sleep rough any time, and let alone in winter.
Definitely not. I mean, there are some wonderful support groups, rather like the knapsack thing that gives away the sleeping bags and things like that, but it shouldn't be necessary to actually get to that stage. There should be some. Though, having said that, there are some I have spoken to over the years. When I grew up on the farm in Lincolnshire, we would have regular, but not frequent, but we would have regular people that had chosen to live on the road, and they would come in and Mum would give them some hot food, and they'd use the bath in exchange for helping out, but they would by choice sleep in the barn or close by. They wouldn't come into the house other than to have a bath. There are still people that choose to do that. Unfortunately, it does tend to be prevalent, to my knowledge, and it's only my personal experience. There's an awful lot of servicemen out there that shouldn't be, because unfortunately they have war experiences or whatever has made them basically be us in. So we'll be talking about that again afterwards, and I'm going to throw the general kind of comment about this homeless thing out more to a kind of a conversational style, and just see what comments come back on this, because we've got three very different organisations definitely, and we also have a mentor that's coming into one of them as well. And there's myself that left school and trundled off to sea, which isn't an option that's open anymore to a large extent. The services, you can't really join those unless you've got academic qualifications. It's very, very difficult. So we're just going across to an ad break, and then we'll be back. Now we're going across just for the last few minutes. I was thinking when you were talking earlier, Tony, about this thing about going out and talking to the elders of ethnic communities and things like that. Do you ever find a resistance because you're a white man going into, let's say, a Jamaican community?
I don't notice. Sorry, I don't notice. Maybe there is some resistance, but I get resistance from anybody, whether they're white or black or whatever. So I don't see any problem with it. No,
I find exactly the same actually. That there is no difference, whether I'm just too thick-skinned and don't notice it. What about you, Sue, when you go into certain areas? Do you ever find that there's an issue?
No, I can honestly say I haven't come across it at all. No,
that is amazing, isn't it? Because we were talking earlier on about there being 91 languages in Bristol now, and I don't know how many different ways of cooking there are, but there's an awful lot, going by the wonderful smells when I walk in certain areas with the smaller cafes and restaurants, and some of the street scene as well. It's very, very similar to some of the other big multinational cities throughout the world that actually seem to have integrated very well whilst keeping their separate identities. Do you think that's important, Tony, that you keep a separate identity as well as being part of the wider community?
I think it's really important to remember your roots, but not to get isolated. And one of the nice things about, I hope, of mentoring in Bristol is I'll be able to helps somebody who's probably quite isolated to move around, to see the different communities and see the different things that are on offer in Bristol, which is an amazing city.
Yes, I quite regret having spent 40 odd years of my life just gaily driving past Bristol and only actually discovering it a few years ago, because it is a fabulous city now. Some bits are quite phenomenal, that you can get out into the countryside so quickly. So many parks inside the city, you only need to walk 2 streets and you've completely changed the ethnic community, from halal across to whatever. And it's all here in the city. It's fantastic. The street art, that's amazing. Do you find that, Sue, that there's any resistance to being a representative in a way of an old established religious organisation building, that you're not part of the city?
I think when we first opened Walsingham House, I think there was a real fear around us being churchy. I think people, a lot of people, not everyone obviously, but I think a lot of people in authority, not the clients and the residents, but people in authority from other agencies, initially, it has to be said, looked upon us and said, oh, they've got a church, no, we're not sending anyone there. And it took an awful lot of networking to educate, if you like, educate them into realising that we didn't care what anyone's thoughts or faith or belief was. They were just who they were, Jack or Mary or whatever. And so it did take a good number of years. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And do you find that there's any religions, Tom, at all? There's a kind of the different religions within the groups that you take in, whether there's somebody says, oh, well, you're a different religion, therefore you can't come here, or you shouldn't come here, or anything like that? Do the youngsters actually care anymore?
It's interesting you say that, because we did have a filmmaker once come in, and he's looking to do some research about youth culture, current youth issues, and he was asking the same question to myself, and I said, well, the best people to ask would be the young people. So we went into the computer room where you had a mix of young people in there, and proposed the question. And they just turn around and say, I don't know what you're talking about. It's just not a thing,
Yeah.
So yeah, which is really good to see.
I think that is the perfect answer, really, isn't it? It is that they might well have their own particular faiths, but they don't actually make it very noticeable, and they don't really care what the other people they're with say. Would you find that as well, Tony?
I'm not sure I was listening. But one thing I do find is, if you've got a sense of humour, you can usually get people laughing and with you. And if you don't use your humour, you're lost.
One of the very early things I was taught, which was going into a city where it was known that you could get things very wrong very quickly. One of the very simple things to remember: if you're nice to other people, the chances are they're going to be nice back to you. Judith, any final comment on that?
No, I think Bristol's a remarkable city. We could have so much trouble and difficulty here with 91 different languages being spoken, and yet, by and large, the city lives together, works together, plays together, and is integrated as much as it's possible to be. I would only say one thing. Yes, by all means, people should keep their own individual culture, but as a feminist, I have to say there are some things I would say, sorry, if you're going to live in this country, then you must treat women equally. If you're going to live in this country, then you must not perform what's called the cut upon your female children. So with those two caveats, I would say that Bristol is really a remarkable city in which to live.
Yes, there are some cultural differences, things like the FGM, as I call it, and things like that are to me, in my mind, not acceptable. And the cultural differences, other than that, I think are absolutely fantastic, whether it's the different colours of the clothes, the different lilts of the voices, the Far Eastern lilt of the Chinese language, and all the guttural Arabic ones. And it's all part of the fun of life. As long as we have some words in common, and it doesn't end up with when I'm talking to my nieces that have grown up in America, we both think we're speaking the same language, but in fact they're speaking some American version of English that doesn't really make sense at the end of the day to me. At first listen, I have to be very careful to be speaking the same language. But as long as we can make ourselves understood in the things. And Judith has just got one final comment in there.
Yes, I've just what I'd like to say to everybody listening now is please give each other a chance. I went to the Somali event in the academy, which was a day devoted to the Somali community, who were saying to people, come and meet us, come and meet us, come and talk to us. And it was really, really a great event, and I learnt so much that day. So please, if you have the chance to meet a new community, please go and please join in, and please give people a chance.
Very, very true. And at the end of the December thing, we do have a complete hour of a foreign language play. So that's all from us today. This is JK. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you all our guests and techie crew. This is JK out.